Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands with an old rag, the familiar smell of engine oil filling her nostrils as she worked beneath the belly of a Cessna 172. At 23, she had spent more time with her hands inside aircraft engines than most people spent in their cars. Her father's small airfield repair shop in rural Texas had been her playground since she could walk, and every bolt, wire, and hydraulic line held no mysteries for her. The sound of approaching footsteps on the hangar's concrete floor made her slide out from under the aircraft. A tall man in a crisp military uniform stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun streaming through the hangar doors. His posture was rigid, official, and slightly uncomfortable as he scanned the cluttered workspace filled with aircraft parts and tools. "I'm looking for Martinez Aircraft Repair," the officer said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. The transport aircraft carrying Sarah and her modified crop duster touched down at a military base in Eastern Europe just as dawn broke across the horizon. The 12-hour flight had given her time to study maps, weather patterns, and intelligence reports about the mission that had gone wrong. What she learned made her stomach tight with worry. 6 months of intensive training had transformed Sarah from a skilled civilian pilot into something entirely different. The advanced combat flying course had pushed her beyond limits she didn't know she possessed. Survival training in harsh environments, weapons systems operation, intelligence gathering techniques, and, most importantly, learning to think and act independently in complex tactical situations. The training base in Nevada was unlike anything she had experienced. Hidden in a remote desert valley, it housed pilots from various special operations units who were learning to operate the new generation of modified civilian aircraft that provided cover for sensitive missions worldwide. Her instructors were veterans of conflicts that officially never happened, men and women who had flown impossible missions in places that didn't appear on any maps. They pushed her relentlessly, not because they doubted her abilities, but because they knew that any weakness in training could mean death in combat. "Martinez, you're thinking like a civilian pilot," growled Chief Instructor Reynolds during a particularly challenging air-to-air combat simulation. "In combat, hesitation kills. You have to trust your instincts and act decisively." The simulated dogfight scenarios were unlike anything she had experienced. Flying against computer-controlled opponents that replicated real-world threats, she learned to use her aircraft's agricultural appearance as camouflage while employing sophisticated electronic warfare systems and defensive measures. But it was the live-fire exercises that truly tested her limits. Flying actual combat missions against remote-controlled target aircraft, using real weapons systems, with the knowledge that a mistake could destroy expensive equipment or endanger ground personnel. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the satisfaction when everything worked perfectly. Mark visited the training base during her 4th month, now bearing the scars of his continued overseas operations but still carrying himself with the easy confidence she remembered. Their reunion was joyful but brief, as operational security limited how much they could discuss about their respective missions. "You've changed," he observed during their one evening together, as they walked through the desert under a sky brilliant with stars. "There's something different about how you carry yourself." Sarah considered this. She did feel different. The months of intense training, the responsibility of learning to use sophisticated weapons systems, the knowledge that she would soon be deploying to active conflict zones. All of it had given her a confidence and sense of purpose she had never experienced before. "I feel like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do," she replied. "All those years working on aircraft, learning to fly, it was all preparation for this." "The instructors are impressed with your progress," Mark said. "Reynolds told me you're one of the best pilots he's ever trained. Natural instincts, excellent judgment under pressure, and the technical knowledge to understand your aircraft systems better than most mechanics." As her training neared completion, Sarah learned that her first deployment would be to the same region where she had conducted her rescue mission. The conflict there had escalated, and intelligence operations required pilots who could blend into the civilian air traffic while conducting surveillance and occasional direct action missions. The aircraft assigned to her was a revelation. From the outside, it appeared to be a simple agricultural sprayer, complete with chemical tanks and spray equipment. But Underneath its innocent exterior lay sophisticated sensors, electronic warfare systems, and carefully concealed weapons. The engineering was masterful, creating a platform that could conduct complex military operations while maintaining perfect cover as a civilian aircraft. "This is your bird now," Colonel Harrison said as they walked around the aircraft during her final briefing. "Everything about it has been tailored to your specifications and mission requirements. The engine modifications give you performance characteristics that most fighter pilots would envy, while maintaining the sound signature of a standard agricultural aircraft." Sarah ran her hands along the aircraft's familiar lines, noting the subtle differences that marked it as a combat platform. The control surfaces were slightly larger for improved maneuverability, the landing gear was reinforced for operations from rough airstrips, and the cockpit contained avionics that belonged in a modern fighter aircraft. Her cover story was perfect. Sarah Martinez, agricultural pilot for hire, conducting crop dusting and pest control operations for farms throughout the region. Her modified aircraft was registered under a civilian company that existed only on paper but had all the proper documentation and references. The deployment began with what appeared to be routine agricultural work. Flying over farms and rural areas, she sprayed actual pesticides and fertilizers while simultaneously gathering intelligence on enemy movements and communications. The dual mission was challenging but fascinating, requiring her to maintain her agricultural cover while operating sophisticated surveillance equipment. Her first real combat mission came 3 weeks after arrival. Intelligence had identified an enemy command post hidden in a rural compound that appeared to be an agricultural facility. The mission was to conduct reconnaissance and, if the opportunity presented itself, eliminate key personnel who were coordinating attacks against civilian populations. Sarah approached the target at dawn, flying low over farmland with her spray equipment operating normally. To any observer, she was simply conducting early morning pest control operations. But her sensors were mapping the compound, identifying defensive positions, and locating high-value targets. The compound was heavily defended, with concealed anti-aircraft weapons and sophisticated communication equipment. As she made her second pass, enemy personnel began taking positions, apparently suspicious of the agricultural aircraft that was spending too much time in their area. The decision to engage came when her sensors detected the enemy preparing to fire a surface-to-air missile at her aircraft. Sarah's training took over, and she reacted with speed that surprised even her. Dropping the agricultural cover, she activated her defensive systems and armed her weapons. The engagement was brief, but intense. Her first missile strike eliminated the anti-aircraft position, while her electronic warfare systems jammed enemy communications. A second pass allowed her to target the command building itself, destroying it with precision that left surrounding structures undamaged. The entire action took less than 5 minutes, and then she was gone, resuming her agricultural flight pattern as if nothing had happened. To anyone monitoring civilian air traffic, she was still just a crop duster going about her normal business. Over the following months, Sarah's reputation grew within the shadowy world of special operations. Her ability to conduct complex missions while maintaining perfect cover made her invaluable for operations that required both subtlety and effectiveness. She could gather intelligence that satellites couldn't obtain, strike targets that conventional forces couldn't reach, and disappear back into civilian air traffic without leaving any trace of military activity. The missions varied widely. Sometimes she conducted surveillance on suspected terrorist training camps, mapping their defenses and identifying key personnel. Other times, she provided close air support for special forces teams operating in remote areas, using her agricultural cover to approach targets that were heavily defended against conventional military aircraft. Her most challenging mission came when intelligence indicated that a group of captured aid workers were being held in a mountain compound deep in enemy territory. The location was too remote for ground rescue, too well defended for conventional airstrikes, and too politically sensitive for acknowledged military operations. Sarah studied the intelligence reports and aerial photographs, planning an approach that would allow her to reach the compound undetected. The mission required her to fly through multiple hostile air defense zones, land at an abandoned airstrip near the compound, conduct a ground assault to free the hostages, and then extract everyone to safety. The infiltration flight was a masterpiece of low-level navigation and electronic warfare. Sarah flew through mountain valleys so narrow that her wingtips nearly brushed the rock walls, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection. Enemy patrol aircraft passed overhead twice, but her agricultural signature and careful positioning kept her invisible to their sensors. Landing at the abandoned airstrip required all her skill, as the runway was badly damaged and littered with debris. But the modified landing gear and powerful engine allowed her to touch down and immediately prepare for the ground phase of the mission. Moving on foot to the compound, Sarah used night vision equipment and intelligence gained from her aerial reconnaissance to avoid guards and reach the building where the hostages were being held. The rescue itself was swift and professional, using techniques she had learned during survival and combat training. Getting 6 rescued aid workers back to the aircraft and airborne before enemy forces could respond required perfect timing and considerable luck. But Sarah's planning paid off, and they were climbing out of the valley before the guards even discovered the empty prison cells. The extraction flight was harrowing, as enemy forces were now fully alert and searching for the mysterious aircraft that had somehow penetrated their defenses. Sarah had to use every defensive system at her disposal, flying an evasive course through the mountains while enemy fighters searched the skies above. When they finally reached friendly airspace, Sarah realized that she had just conducted one of the most complex solo rescue missions in modern military history. She had infiltrated heavily defended enemy territory, conducted a ground assault, rescued 6 hostages, and escaped without losses or international incident. News of the rescue spread quickly through special operations communities, though the details remained classified. Sarah's reputation evolved from skilled pilot to living legend, someone who could accomplish missions that seemed impossible. Colonel Harrison's congratulations were brief, but meaningful. What you did last night goes beyond anything we've seen from a single operator. You've set a new standard for what's possible with these modified aircraft and the right pilot. As Sarah's second year of operations drew to a close, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. The quiet mechanic's daughter who had once been content to test aircraft for other people's adventures had become one of the most effective covert operatives in the world. Her aircraft had been upgraded repeatedly, incorporating lessons learned from each mission. The latest modifications included even more sophisticated sensors, improved defensive systems, and weapons that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. But the most important upgrade was her own experience and instincts, honed through dozens of combat missions in conditions that would challenge the most experienced military pilots. Standing in the hangar at her current base, Sarah looked at her aircraft and thought about the future. There would be more missions, more challenges, and more opportunities to make a difference in a world where conventional military operations weren't always possible or appropriate. Mark had been assigned to work with her unit, and their partnership had evolved into both a professional and personal relationship that enriched both their lives. Together, they represented a new generation of covert operatives who combined the best of military training with the flexibility and creativity that came from operating outside traditional command structures. "Ready for tomorrow's mission?" Mark asked as he joined her in the hangar. Sarah smiled, running her hand along her aircraft's wing. Tomorrow would bring another challenge, another opportunity to prove that determination, skill, and courage could overcome any obstacle. "I was born ready," she replied, and meant every word. The young woman who had once surprised a colonel by being found working under an aircraft in her father's hangar had become something nobody expected, a pilot who dominated the skies alone, whose name was spoken with respect and admiration by those who knew what she had accomplished. In a world where conflicts were fought in shadows and victories were measured by missions that officially never happened, Sarah Martinez had found her calling. She had proven that the most unlikely people could rise to meet extraordinary challenges, and that sometimes the best warriors were those who nobody saw coming until it was far too late. The dogfights she dominated weren't the aerial duels of previous generations, but complex missions requiring intelligence, adaptability, and the courage to operate alone in hostile territory. And In this new kind of warfare, she had no equals. Mark's team had been conducting surveillance operations over a disputed border region where a civil war was escalating beyond anyone's predictions. Their agricultural aircraft were perfect cover, appearing to be simple cargo haulers while actually gathering intelligence and occasionally conducting precision strikes against high-value targets. But 3 days ago, they had flown into what turned out to be a carefully planned trap. The enemy has new surface-to-air missile systems, Colonel Harrison explained as they walked across the tarmac toward the hangar where her aircraft was being prepared. Russian-made, very sophisticated. They shot down 2 of our aircraft and forced the 3rd to make an emergency landing in hostile territory. Sarah absorbed this information while checking her aircraft systems. The crop duster had been equipped with the most advanced defensive electronics available, but she knew that no amount of technology could guarantee survival in a hot combat zone. The survivors are holed up in a mountain village about 60 miles inside enemy territory, the colonel continued. Our satellite intelligence shows at least 3 people alive, but we can't get close enough with conventional rescue assets without triggering a major international incident. Lieutenant Commander Elena Volkov, a Russian expatriate who served as their intelligence specialist, joined them at the aircraft. Her accent was slight, but noticeable as she briefed Sarah on the latest developments. The enemy forces are conducting systematic searches of the area, Elena explained, pointing to aerial photographs spread across a makeshift table. They know our people are there, but the terrain is working in our favor. The village is built into a mountainside with caves and tunnels that provide natural fortification. Sarah studied the photographs, noting the narrow valley approaches and the steep terrain that would make conventional rescue operations nearly impossible. What about extraction? How do I get them out once I locate them? That's the complicated part, Colonel Harrison admitted. The village has a small airstrip, barely long enough for your aircraft. But it's overlooked by enemy positions on the surrounding ridges. You'll have to get in and out fast, probably under fire. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders as she continued her pre-flight inspection. She had never flown in combat, had never been shot at, and had certainly never attempted a rescue mission in hostile territory. But Mark and the others were counting on her, and she was their best chance of getting home alive. The flight plan took her along a circuitous route designed to avoid enemy radar installations and patrol aircraft. She would fly low through mountain valleys, using the terrain to mask her approach, then navigate to the target village using only GPS coordinates and dead reckoning navigation. As she climbed into the cockpit, Elena handed her a small radio with an encrypted frequency. If you make contact with the survivors, they'll be monitoring this channel. The code word is Thunderbird. The takeoff was smooth, but Sarah's nerves were taut as she guided the aircraft into the morning sky. The modified crop duster handled beautifully, responding to her inputs with the precision she had come to appreciate during months of test flights. But this time, the stakes were life and death. Flying low through the mountain valleys was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The aircraft skimmed just above the treetops, following contours of the land that required constant attention and split-second decision-making. Her training kicked in, and she found herself falling into the rhythm of low-level navigation, reading the terrain ahead and adjusting her course to maintain concealment. 2 hours into the flight, she encountered her first real challenge. Enemy patrol aircraft appeared on her radar, 2 fast-moving jets conducting a search pattern in the area she needed to cross. Sarah descended even lower, practically brushing the tops of the pine trees as she waited for the patrol to pass. The radio crackled with distant communications in a language she didn't recognize, but the tension in the voices was unmistakable. Someone was coordinating a search effort, and they were taking it very seriously. When the patrol aircraft finally moved on, Sarah climbed slightly and continued toward the target coordinates. The landscape below was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Pristine mountain wilderness marred by the smoke of burning villages and the occasional flash of artillery fire in the distance. As she approached the target valley, Sarah switched to the encrypted radio frequency Elena had given her. Thunderbird calling lost sheep. Thunderbird calling lost sheep. Do you copy? Static filled the cockpit for long seconds before a familiar voice responded. Thunderbird, this is Lost Sheep Leader. Mark here. We copy you loud and clear, and we are very happy to hear your voice. Relief flooded through Sarah at the sound of Mark's voice, but she forced herself to maintain professional composure. Lost Sheep Leader, what's your status? How many souls do you have? We have 3 survivors, all mobile, but one is injured. We're in a defensible position, but enemy forces are closing in. We estimate maybe 2 hours before they locate us. Sarah crested a ridge and saw the village spread out below her. Smoke was rising from several buildings, and she could see military vehicles moving through the narrow streets. The small airstrip Elena had mentioned was visible, but it was indeed tiny, barely a dirt runway carved into the mountainside. Lost Sheep Leader, I have visual on the village. The airstrip looks challenging. What's your exact position? We're in the caves above the village, north side of the valley. Look for signal mirror flashes. Sarah banked the aircraft and scanned the mountainside until she saw the reflected sunlight Mark was using to mark their position. The caves were about half a mile from the airstrip, connected by what appeared to be a narrow mountain trail. I see you, Lost Sheep. The extraction is going to be hot. Enemy forces all over the village, and that airstrip is in plain view of their positions. Understood, Thunderbird. We're ready to move when you are. Sarah circled the valley once more, studying the terrain and the enemy positions. Several ideas formed in her mind, each one risky but potentially workable. She keyed the radio again. Lost Sheep Leader, here's the plan. I'm going to create a distraction on the south side of the valley, draw their attention away from the airstrip. When I give you the signal, you move fast to the extraction point. I'll come in low from the north, touch down just long enough for you to get aboard. Then, we're out of here. Roger that, Thunderbird. Standing by. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed the throttles forward, climbing to gain altitude for her diversionary attack. The aircraft carried several smoke rockets that could simulate weapons fire without actually causing casualties, perfect for creating confusion and drawing attention away from the real objective. She dove toward the southern end of the village, releasing the smoke rockets in a pattern designed to look like a strafing run on the enemy positions there. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Vehicles began moving toward the apparent attack, soldiers ran for cover, and radio chatter exploded across multiple frequencies. Now, Lost Sheep. Move, move, move. Sarah pulled up from her dive and circled around to approach the airstrip from the north, staying low to avoid detection for as long as possible. Through her binoculars, she could see 3 figures moving quickly down the mountain trail toward the airstrip. But her diversionary attack had only worked partially. Some enemy forces had responded to the fake attack, but others remained focused on the search for the downed airmen. As she lined up for her approach to the narrow airstrip, she saw muzzle flashes from weapons aimed in her direction. The first bullets struck her aircraft as she descended toward the runway, spider webbing the side window and punching holes through the engine cowling. Warning lights flashed on her instrument panel, but the engine continued running smoothly. Sarah fought to keep the aircraft stable as more gunfire erupted from the surrounding hills. The narrow runway rushed up toward her, and she had to use every bit of skill she possessed to keep the aircraft aligned properly despite the hostile fire. The touchdown was hard, but successful. She kept the engine running as the 3 survivors ran toward the aircraft. Mark reached her first, yanking open the passenger door and helping his injured teammate inside. The third man, whom Sarah recognized as one of the other contractor pilots, climbed in behind them. Go, go, go! Mark shouted over the engine noise and the crack of incoming bullets. Sarah pushed the throttles to maximum power and began her takeoff roll. The aircraft was heavily loaded now, and the short runway gave her very little margin for error. Bullets continued to strike the fuselage and wings, but nothing hit anything vital. The aircraft lifted off just as they reached the end of the runway, clearing the trees at the valley's edge by mere feet. Sarah banked sharply to the left, using the mountain ridge to shield them from further ground fire. Everyone okay back there? She called over the intercom. We're good, Mark replied. Rodriguez has a broken arm, but he'll be fine. Sarah, that was incredible flying. I don't know how you managed to land and take off from that strip under fire. Just returning the favor, Sarah said, checking her instruments for any signs of serious damage. You'd do the same for me. The flight home was tense, but uneventful. Sarah maintained radio silence and flew low through the mountain valleys, retracing her route toward friendly territory. The aircraft had taken several hits, but nothing that compromised its flight capability. As they crossed into friendly airspace, Mark moved up to the cockpit area behind Sarah's seat. I want you to know that what you did today was extraordinary. You saved our lives. Sarah glanced back at him, seeing genuine admiration in his eyes. It's what we do for each other. No, it's more than that. I've flown with a lot of pilots, military and civilian. What you did today, flying into combat for the first time, landing on that strip under fire, that was world-class piloting. When they landed at the European base, Colonel Harrison was waiting with a full debriefing team. As Sarah shut down the engine and climbed out of the aircraft, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with the realization that her life had just changed dramatically. Outstanding work, the colonel said as he approached. The mission was a complete success, and you performed beyond anyone's expectations. Over the next several hours, Sarah provided detailed reports of the mission, including her observations of enemy positions, equipment, and tactics. The intelligence she had gathered during the rescue flight was valuable for planning future operations in the region. But, as the debriefing sessions continued, she became aware that Colonel Harrison and his staff were evaluating her for something beyond simple rescue missions. Their questions focused heavily on her ability to operate independently in hostile environments, her decision-making under pressure, and her combat effectiveness. Miss Martinez, the colonel said during a private conversation that evening, we have a proposal for you. What happened today demonstrated capabilities that we desperately need for ongoing operations in this region. I'm listening, Sarah replied, though she suspected she already knew what he was going to say. We need pilots who can operate these modified aircraft in combat situations. People who understand the systems, can think independently, and have the skills to complete missions that conventional military operations can't handle. Sarah looked out the window at her aircraft, now being repaired and upgraded by the base maintenance crew. The bullet holes were being patched, and she could see technicians installing additional defensive systems. You're offering me a combat position, she said. I'm offering you the chance to make a real difference. The work we're doing here, the operations that Mark and his team conduct, they save lives and prevent conflicts from escalating into major wars. But we need more pilots like you, people who can handle themselves when things go wrong. Sarah thought about Mark, about the other brave men and women who risked their lives in these shadowy operations. She thought about the 3 survivors she had rescued that day, and about the satisfaction she had felt knowing that her skills had brought them home safely. What would be involved, she asked. Training first. Advanced combat flying, survival skills, weapons systems, intelligence operations. Then, deployment to wherever you're needed most. It would be dangerous work, but important work. As night fell over the European base, Sarah walked alone across the tarmac to look at her aircraft one more time. The bullet holes had been patched, but the memory of flying through hostile fire would remain with her forever. It had been terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, and she realized that she wanted to experience that again. More than that, she wanted to be part of something that mattered, something that made a difference in the world. The quiet life of maintaining and testing aircraft suddenly seemed small compared to the possibility of active service in defense of peace and justice. When she returned to Colonel Harrison's office the next morning, her mind was made up. I accept your offer, she said simply. The colonel smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Your training begins tomorrow. You found it, Sarah replied, standing and wiping her hands again. Though my dad's not here right now, he's flying supplies to the Johnson Ranch. What can I do for you? The officer's eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. Sarah was used to this reaction. Her long black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls were stained with the evidence of honest work. Most people didn't expect the head mechanic to be a young woman, especially one who looked more like she should be teaching school than rebuilding aircraft engines. I'm Colonel James Harrison from Randolph Air Force Base, he said, extending his hand. We've heard excellent things about your shop's work. We have some civilian contractors working with us, and they need maintenance on their aircraft. Reliable, quality work. Sarah shook his hand firmly, noting his surprise at her confident grip. We can handle that. What kind of aircraft are we talking about? Modified crop dusters, mostly. Some private jets. The contractors are working on specialized projects. His tone suggested he wouldn't be sharing details about those projects. As they discussed the potential contract, Sarah found herself studying the colonel's demeanor. There was something urgent beneath his professional exterior, a tension that spoke of important deadlines and high stakes. When he mentioned the pay rates for the maintenance work, her eyebrows rose. It was significantly higher than their usual commercial rates. The only catch, Colonel Harrison added, is that we need someone who can not only maintain these aircraft but also fly them after repairs. Our usual test pilots are unavailable for this particular project. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Test flying. Do you have a pilot's license, Miss Martinez? I do. Commercial license, instrument rating, about 800 hours. She didn't mention that most of those hours were in small aircraft around the local area, or that her father had taught her to fly before she was legally old enough to drive a car. The colonel nodded approvingly. The aircraft we're dealing with have been modified extensively. They need someone who understands both the mechanical systems and can properly evaluate their flight characteristics. It's not glamorous work, but it's important. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself driving through the gates of a small, unmarked airfield about 50 miles from her father's shop. The facility was surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire, and serious-looking guards checked her identification twice before allowing her to proceed to the hangar complex. Inside the largest hangar, she discovered what the colonel had meant by modified crop dusters. The aircraft lined up before her were barely recognizable as the simple agricultural planes they had started as. Their engines had been significantly upgraded, their wings reinforced, and various electronic equipment pods had been mounted beneath their fuselages. Most striking of all, several of them had mounting points for what were clearly weapon systems. Impressive, aren't they? A voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see a man about her age approaching. He was tall and lean, with the confident bearing of a military pilot, but he wore civilian clothes. His sandy hair and easy smile gave him a friendly appearance that contrasted sharply with the serious nature of their surroundings. I'm Mark Stevens, he said, extending his hand. I'll be your liaison for this project. Former Air Force, now working as a contractor. Sarah Martinez. And, yes, they're impressive. Also completely illegal if they're armed civilian aircraft. Mark's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Let's just say we're operating in a legal gray area. These birds are being prepared for overseas operations in countries where the usual rules don't apply. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into understanding these modified aircraft. Each one was unique, with different engine configurations, avionics packages, and structural modifications. The work was challenging and fascinating, requiring her to essentially learn new aircraft systems from scratch. The test flights were exhilarating. The modified engines gave the aircraft performance characteristics that were completely different from their original agricultural versions. They climbed faster, flew higher, and responded to controls with a precision that transformed them from workhorses into thoroughbreds. Mark often accompanied her on these test flights, and she began to understand that he wasn't just a liaison. He was evaluating her piloting skills, watching how she handled the aircraft in various configurations and flight regimes. Their conversations during these flights revealed that the overseas operations he had mentioned were far more serious than simple cargo hauling. These aircraft are being prepared for operations in regions where conventional military aircraft can't be used, he explained during one flight as they tested a newly installed navigation system. Places where we need to blend in, operate without the political complications that come with military insignia. Sarah understood. These were aircraft being prepared for covert operations, possibly in conflict zones where their agricultural appearance would provide cover for intelligence gathering or other sensitive missions. As the weeks passed, her relationship with Mark evolved from professional to personal. He was intelligent, shared her passion for aviation, and treated her as an equal rather than an oddity in a male-dominated field. Their evening conversations over dinner at the small diner near the airfield revealed a man who was dedicated to serving his country, but troubled by the moral complexities of covert operations. Sometimes I wonder if we're making the world better or just making the same mistakes in new places, he confided one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Sarah found herself caring about him, about his internal struggles, and about the important work they were doing together. The aircraft they maintained and tested would carry brave men and women into dangerous situations, and their meticulous work might mean the difference between mission success and tragedy. But as autumn arrived and their project neared completion, Mark began receiving encrypted communications that left him increasingly tense. The overseas deployment was accelerating, and he would soon be leaving to join the operational team. I want you to know that working with you has been the best part of this assignment, he told her one evening as they performed a final test flight on the last aircraft in their group. You're an exceptional pilot, Sarah. Better than most of the military pilots I've flown with. Thank you, she replied, focusing on the instrument panel to hide the emotions his words stirred. It's been an honor working on these aircraft. What she didn't say was that she had been hoping he would ask her to join the overseas operation. Her skills were clearly valuable, and she had proven herself capable of handling the modified aircraft better than anyone expected. But she also understood that covert operations were still very much a male-dominated world, and her youth and gender made her an unlikely candidate for such dangerous work. The day Mark left for his deployment, Sarah stood in the hangar surrounded by the aircraft they had worked on together. Colonel Harrison had new contracts for her, more aircraft to maintain and test, but nothing that captured her imagination the way this project had. She spent the evening in her small apartment near the airfield, trying to focus on technical manuals for the new aircraft she would be working on. But her mind kept drifting to Mark, wherever he was flying now, and to the realization that she wanted more than just maintaining and testing aircraft for other people's adventures. The next morning, she was awakened by her phone ringing insistently. Colonel Harrison's voice was tense when she answered. Sarah, I need you at the airfield immediately. We have a situation. When she arrived at the hangar, she found it buzzing with activity. Military personnel were moving equipment, and several of the aircraft she had worked on were being prepared for immediate deployment. Colonel Harrison met her at the entrance, his face grim. We've lost contact with our overseas team, he said without preamble. The mission has gone sideways, and we need to mount a rescue operation. The problem is, we're short on qualified pilots who know these aircraft systems. Sarah's heart clenched. Mark's team, the colonel nodded. Among others, we need someone who can fly one of these birds into a hostile environment and bring our people home. Someone who knows the aircraft inside and out and can handle whatever they encounter. He paused, studying her face carefully. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but you're the most qualified person we have available. The question is, are you willing to risk everything to bring them home? Sarah looked at the aircraft being prepared around them, thinking of Mark and the other brave people who were now in danger far from home. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. When do we leave? She asked.